Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a truly fascinating set of source materials to dive into today, and we'll be tackling a pretty fundamental question about human flourishing. Specifically, we're looking at the profound relationship between our internal character and our external, worldly excellence. We're going to map out what we call the architecture of moral integrity, and let me tell you, it challenges a lot of how we normally think about success. Let's just jump right in. There is this quiet assumption embedded in almost every modern conversation we have about leadership. We kind of just accept that what a person does in the world can somehow be completely separated from who they are on the inside. We talk about skills and strategies as if they just float completely free of character. It's almost as if a clever enough method can somehow substitute for a well-formed soul. But the timeless truth, and really the collective argument of all our sources today, is that this is entirely backward. True excellence and a truly meaningful life is always built from the inside out. The whole architecture relies on a sufficiently formed soul. All right, let's get into section 1, the indispensable center, inner formation. To really get a handle on this, we have to start at the core philosophical foundation. Any genuine societal improvement absolutely requires individual moral improvement. It is incredibly fascinating how widely different historical thinkers converge on this exact same structural truth. It's like a giant puzzle where they all found the same key piece. Immanuel Kant warns us that we often confuse advancing our external conditions with internal character, pointing out that external culture just cannot substitute for high moral formation. Then you have Leo Tolstoy, who insists you literally cannot change society through institutions or policies alone. The actual lever of change is the individual's soul. David Starr Jordan distills this perfectly by arguing that real excellence, the kind that actually lasts, cannot be separated from right living. And finally, Mahatma Gandhi points out that the gap between stated belief and lived behavior is exactly where our integrity bleeds out. Our public words and our private conduct have to be identical. So the takeaway here? The absolute foundation of any enterprise is the internal character of its people. Moving right along to section 2, modeling true behavior. Okay, so we have this abstract philosophical foundation, but what happens when it meets messy reality? Well, there's a story recounted by Ryan Holiday about former President Jimmy Carter and his father Earl, and it honestly refuses to let us hide behind good intentions. So, back in the late 1930s, roughly 40% of the population smoked. Earl Carter pulled his young son Jimmy aside and made him promise not to smoke until he was 21. He even bribed him with a gold watch. And Jimmy kept his promise. He tried one single cigarette at 21, absolutely hated it, and never smoked again. A total success story, right? Well, here is the tragic irony of it all. Carter's mother and his 3 siblings didn't follow Earl's spoken rule. Instead, they followed Earl's actual lived example, because Earl was a smoker himself. Devastatingly, all 4 of them eventually died of pancreatic cancer, while Jimmy Carter lived to be 98. The crucial point here is captured so perfectly by Ryan Holiday. Look, Earl Carter's failure was absolutely not a lack of love. He clearly loved his son and wanted the best for him. His failure was a lack of integration. He just couldn't bring his own life into alignment with the very thing he was asking for. His spoken words and his lived life ran on totally separate tracks, and his other children followed the track that was walked, not the one that was talked. And this brings us to a slightly warmer, but honestly, equally profound thought from Sam Levinson's father. He said, "Remember, my son, if you ever need a helping hand, you'll find one at the end of your arm." It's a brilliant way of illustrating that the self is the primary instrument of moral formation. You literally cannot outsource it. And as Earl Carter's story so starkly reminds us, this instrument has to be kept in tune daily through our actual physical practice, not just in our hopes and our aspirations. Which leads us nicely into section 3, the courage to see clearly. So, if the self is the instrument, how on earth do we ensure it's tuned properly? Well, we have to shift our focus from our outward actions to our inward perception. Honest sight is absolutely necessary here. Consider this brilliant parable from Anthony de Mello. There's a starry-eyed disciple who is told by a master that by making the master his ultimate authority, he's actually doing double harm. First, the disciple completely stunts his own growth by outsourcing his perception. He's refusing to see things for himself. And second, he harms the teacher by installing this flawless projected image in his head, rather than seeing a real flawed human being. When we engage in that kind of spiritual timidity, even when it's disguised as reverence, we create a hall of mirrors, and we end up forfeiting the very faculty that makes genuine development possible. This ties right into a fantastic point from Les Brown, who notes most people fail not because they aim too high and miss, but because they aim too low and hit. Think about the disciple in that parable. By handing over his perception, he's aiming low to ensure a certain small, comfortable safety, but in doing so, he's completely foreclosing on anything larger. Right effort in life requires calibrated effort, and you just cannot calibrate your effort if you don't have an honest, courageous perception of reality. All right, let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, Resisting External Metrics. What actually happens when this internal formation is too weak and our perception gets clouded? Let's look at this on a massive systemic level. Seth Godin shares an incredible case study about the U.S. News and World Report college rankings. It all started when a struggling magazine published a fairly informal college ranking, basically just to generate some revenue. But in response, these centuries-old universities panicked. They literally assigned staff to understand and gain these new metrics, and things got corrosive really quickly. Schools drastically increased spending on sports facilities just to look better on paper, and some outright cheated on their self-reported statistics. Ultimately, the measured metric completely displaced the institution's original educational missions. It's wild. An outsider's artificial hierarchy fundamentally changed systems that had been around for hundreds of years. This whole fiasco brilliantly illustrates our core thesis today. When a system lacks the internal moral formation to resist external capture, it'll end up restructuring its entire mission to fit a fake hierarchy. This is exactly the kind of inversion Immanuel Kant was warning us about. And the antidote isn't creating a better ranking system. It's what mythologist Joseph Campbell called a hero, someone deeply devoted to something much bigger than oneself. A true hero cannot be fully captured by a ranking system, which brings us right back to Tolstoy's point. Individual moral improvement is quite literally the only durable defense we have against systemic corruption. That brings us to our final part, Section 5, the architecture of integrity. So how do we actually build this defense and construct this kind of life? We need operational tools to finally bring the inner and outer life into alignment. Leadership coach Greg Harden introduces a powerful triad for exactly this. It's not just a random list of traits, it's a fully integrated posture. First, you need courage to see clearly and act honestly, resisting that tricky hall of mirrors. Next, you need commitment, which provides the consistent engagement required for real formation. But the secret ingredient here is compassion. Why? Because compassion prevents your courage and commitment from calcifying into something harsh and rigid. To get a practical handle on how compassion works, check out this wry little observation from William Osler. He said, "Quit worrying about your health, it'll go away." It's funny, sure, but it lands really deep. Human nature almost always prefers to manage the anxiety about a problem rather than actually address the problem itself. We worry, we extract promises, kind of like Earl Carter did with his son Jimmy, but we fail to actually do the daily practice. True compassion is care made operational. It means turning that care inward, toward the very hard project of becoming someone whose actions and words are absolutely identical. So, what is the ultimate payoff of all this? Winston Churchill once said that attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. But as we've explored today, it's not a little thing at all. It is the whole architecture. When you actually achieve inner alignment, your private discipline translates directly into lived behavior. Clear-eyed perception replaces blind deference. Institutions find the strength to resist external metrics, and the individual starts actively changing their environment. But most importantly, you gain true freedom. The incredible freedom of no longer having to manage that exhausting gap between the image you present to the world and the reality of who you truly are. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on as we wrap up today's explainer. Are your spoken words and your lived life running on the same track? Or are they a bit like Earl Carter's, running parallel but never actually touching? The architecture of your life is built from the inside out. I really hope this deep dive has challenged you to check your own foundation. Keep reflecting on that, and hey, thanks so much for joining me today.